When it comes to the world of horror, pretty much nothing is off limits for movie studios to remake. Even titles you'd think were untouchable, like The Exorcist, have either seen a remake release, had a remake shelved, or currently have a remake in the works. While fans often have bones to pick with remakes though, sometimes the original creators themselves have a thing or two to say as well. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 horror movie remakes that pissed off the original creators. Number 8, Suspiria 2018. Like a few movies on this list, I'd personally argue that Suspiria 2018 is an absolutely solid movie. It certainly won't be for everyone's tastes, but you can't say that it's anywhere near the kind of lazy, thoughtless retread that many remakes are. The director had a vision to update this tale of a witch-run ballet school, and for better or worse, he absolutely stuck with it. Of course, because this movie is so different from the original in terms of tone, runtime, set design, performances, violence, and music, you can understand why die-hard fans of the original view it as complete sacrilege. Sadly, that's also a thought shared by original director and horror legend Dario Argento as well. Though he's not gone into great detail on his criticisms, the couple of things he has had to say about the remake have been, well, damning. As picked up by Bloody Disgusting, in one interview he claimed, quote, "It betrayed the spirit of the original film," and in another he went into specifics saying that the flick, quote, "lacks fear, music, tension, and scenic creativity." Number 7, Child's Play 2019. Though it was very much conceptualized as being yet another blockbuster revival of a classic horror property, the remake of Child's Play didn't hit the same heights that Halloween and It reached around the same time. The main issue was that it didn't really do anything remarkable until a third act, and for the most hardcore fans, the franchise had already been suitably revitalized with the previous 2 movies in the main continuity, those being Curse and Cult of Chucky. Now, admittedly, this one isn't an original creator who was pissed off by the remake, but rather actress Christine Elise McCarthy, who starred in the second film and cameoed in Cult of Chucky. Her main issue was with how the remake had no interest in respecting the fan-favorite characters and actors that made the series a hit in the first place. Likewise, she thought a remake came at the wrong time creatively, as the franchise had already enjoyed a strong recent revival, like I just said. Holding nothing back, she said in an interview with Horror Geek Life, quote, "I think it's an unbelievably huge dick move. I think it's a douche move, absolutely. I don't know why they would with a healthy franchise. To make a competing franchise with an existing, and like you said, healthy, robust franchise is super douchey. And nobody from the original franchise is involved. They're not going to have Brad Dourif, the voice of Chucky, they're not going to have Don Mancini, the franchise creator, and they're not going to have any of us," end quote. Number 6, The Wicker Man 2006. The Wicker Man remake is a hilarious piece of art, that's just an objective fact. It might totally fail as a horror movie, but as a piece of comedy gold, it's virtually unrivaled. From the script to the direction to the performances, it's the kind of bad that you can only achieve when someone is trying so hard to be good. Whether you're screaming "not the bees" or punching people off their bikes while dressed in a bear costume, you'll definitely have been influenced by this movie in one form or another. However, while that might be good for you and me, you can see how the creators of the original Wicker Man would be a little bit pissed off that they have to be associated with this embarrassing train wreck. Even before release though, original director Robin Hardy was annoyed by the remake, demanding that his name be taken off all the marketing and promotional material. Star Christopher Lee similarly didn't care for the new take, or new takes on any of his films for that matter, at one point saying that he simply, quote, "didn't believe in remakes." Later, Hardy would make his own belated follow-up to The Wicker Man titled The Wicker Tree, which sadly bombed with critics. At the time, he quipped that even in spite of the terrible reviews, it was still, quote, 1,000 times better than the remake. Number 5, Halloween 2007. Rob Zombie's Halloween took a lot of flack back in the day, and you can totally see why. While many horror fans simply didn't jive with Zombie's gritty, grimy style, which is fair enough, the main issue with his 2 movies was just how much emphasis was put on demystifying iconic villain Michael Myers. Like so many remakes from the 2000s, huge chunks of the story were dedicated to explaining the origin for the killer, delving into his childhood and exactly how he came to be the Shape. Peeling the rug back on one of cinema's most enigmatic villains would have been a risk no matter the approach, but Zombie's miserable backstory was about as cliched as it comes. Funnily enough, original creator John Carpenter thought so too, claiming the new focus robbed Myers of some of his mystique and appeal. However, the remake pissed him off for much more personal reasons than how the story was adapted. See, John Carpenter is usually a pretty easygoing guy, and hasn't had many bad words to say about the many remakes of his iconic flicks. The exception is Rob Zombie's Halloween though, primarily because Zombie himself pissed Carpenter off while marketing the film. In interviews, Carpenter called Zombie a quote, lying piece of shit, after the latter allegedly referred to the director as being cold when approached about the remake. Carpenter, on the other hand, claims he was anything but, and actually encouraged Zombie to run with the property and do whatever he wanted to. Number 4, The Omen 2006. The late, great Richard Donner mastered pretty much every genre he put his mind to, and horror was no different. A few years before truly becoming a cinematic icon by helming Superman, Donner released The Omen, a less refined but no less artistic effort. A story about the Antichrist, the murderous antics of young Damien Thorne took the horror world by storm, so it was no surprise that the studio was eager to spin a franchise out of them. 2 sequels would follow, as well as a belated 4th flick 10 years after the 3rd, but Donner didn't return to direct, busy as he was changing the superhero landscape forever. When every old horror property was given a resurgence in the 2000s though, Fox didn't miss a trick, giving The Omen the reboot treatment, and a disastrous remake released in 2006. Despite having a ridiculously strong cast headlined by Julia Stiles, Liev Schreiber, Mia Farrow and David Thewlis, it was unfortunately made by the guy responsible for A Good Day to Die Hard and Max Payne, and was just as awful as both of those. Not one to rip into another creative's hard work for pleasure though, Donner only had one descriptor for the remake: horrible. Number 3, I Am Legend 2007. Now this is a peculiar entry on this list because the author of I Am Legend, Richard Matheson, didn't simply reserve his annoyance for the remake of the movie based on his seminal book. In fact, he had issues with every adaptation. With The Last Man on Earth, he thought Vincent Price was miscast, The Omega Man, he thought they turned his work into a big dumb action film, and I Am Legend all coming into his crosshairs. It's of course the latter we're talking about today, as it's considered as much a movie remake as it is another adaptation of the source material. While a relatively thrilling and competently made horror about the seemingly only man left alive on Earth after a cure goes wrong and transforms most humans into zombie-like monsters, it completely drops the ball in the ending. Rather than follow the book's morbid but fitting finale, the film opts for a Hollywood ending where the star, Will Smith in this case, sacrifices himself to save the human race. Though Richard Matheson didn't comment on the movie after its release, he did discuss it during development, once again frustrated that the producers were deviating so much from the source material. Number 2, Dawn of the Dead 2004. Now, I know what you're all thinking, Josh, Dawn of the Dead is one of the better horror remakes. What on earth is it doing on this list? Well, I completely agree. Zack Snyder's first zombie flick is a rough and ready ride full of absurd undead action, a killer soundtrack, and a stellar ensemble cast. However, it undeniably is a stripped-down version of the original, focusing primarily on action rather than any of the quieter character moments or social satire that made the initial Dawn so resonant. And that's exactly what George A. Romero had an issue with. In fact, the legendary director thought of the film as more of a video game than a movie at the time of release, and reflected on that comment in 2013. There, he criticized the lack of depth to the narrative, explaining, quote, "I sort of thought it lost its reason for being. I know that a lot of people really like it very much, Stephen King, for example. I didn't like it very much. Basically because I was using the idea for satire. My film needed to be done right when it was done, because that sort of shopping mall was completely new. It was the first one in Pennsylvania that we had ever seen. The heart of the story is based in that, and I don't think the remake had it," end quote. Even as a fan of the remake, you can see where Romero was coming from here, admittedly. Number 1, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2010. A lot like John Carpenter, Wes Craven was no stranger to having his movies remade, and whether he was directly involved as a producer or not, rarely had a bad word to say about the filmmakers tackling his history. Consequently, when A Nightmare on Elm Street was redone in 2010, he mostly just distanced himself from the project rather than criticize it. The same cannot be said for original star Robert Englund though. Englund, of course, was instrumental to the success of the original series, starring as villain Freddy Krueger for decades. So much of what he brought to the role made Freddy so popular in those flicks, and as a result the actor has pretty strong feelings about how the character should be depicted. Now, the Nightmare remake did have some sound ideas, and the casting of Jackie Earle Haley as the new Freddy was promising on paper, but it just didn't hit the mark, and Englund went on record to point out where he thought the production went wrong, saying, quote, "They decided to take Freddy out of the nightmare, when Freddy is only ever meant to be imagined in the subconscious in the dream landscape of his victims. When you take Freddy out of the dream, we made that mistake ourselves in a sequence of part 2, it just doesn't work for the character. When you make Freddy earthbound in some way, you lose part of his power of symbolism," end quote. He was also a little bit miffed that you never got to see the teenagers actually act like teenagers and friends before being attacked by Freddy in the film either, but it should be said that he was generally very gracious about the production in these interviews, heaping so much praise on the actors involved specifically. It's clear that he was only ever annoyed at the actual story developments. In those interviews as well, I just want to note that he also said there should have been another Freddy vs. Jason before the remake, which I can totally get behind.